So we know all about the craze with the Super Nintendo Classic and the Nintendo Classic as kind of small little systems that have a compilation of games, whether it's NES games or Super Nintendo games built in. You know, they either go for $80 or $60, come with a couple controllers and everything. But maybe you've had a hard time finding these, right? Or maybe you don't like the selection of games, and rather than trying to track one of these down for what ends up being a much higher price in the aftermarket, maybe you want to just build one, because you can do that fairly easily. In fact, today we're going to take a look at how you can build one of these systems for yourself that can play far more games, and it's actually cheaper. So in order to do this, we're going to use a Raspberry Pi 3. There's the Raspberry Pi 3 Model B, and there's the B Plus that's out now, but mostly you just need a Raspberry Pi 3, and they're relatively cheap. And last time I took a look at one, a lot of people had a ton of questions about it, about which power adapter do I get, memory cards, cases, everything. And I thought to myself, I'm going to do this, I'm going to find a starter kit, okay? And the idea of the starter kit is you buy the kit and you don't need anything else. Pretty much you can do everything to get the Raspberry Pi set up and running just with the kit. And I did that, so I found one online. It's ABUX. You're going to see kind of the link in the picture here and everything. I reached out to them. They sent this to me for doing this project, because I wanted to get a Raspberry Pi 3 starter kit anyway for you guys, and they were kind enough to provide it for the project we're going to do here today. So the other two things I have here are technically optional, but one other thing you will need is a USB stick. And the idea of the USB stick is to put your game files, your ROM files, whatnot, on there, and that's how we'll transfer them over. Now, if you get a little further in it, you can also wirelessly send the games over and everything, but for this video, we're going to use a common USB stick. Most people have these laying around. USB 2 is fine, and it can range in sizes. Honestly, if you're just doing Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, that kind of stuff, you get away with like a 4 or even 8 gigabyte one. If you want to go a little higher, you want to get one like this is, for example, an 8 gigabyte, you go up to 16, 32. You know, you can keep going pretty far with it. Now, I have a couple optional pieces other than this. I wanted a case that would look really good under your TV, right? I also wanted to have a power button and a reset button, things that most systems would have, obviously. The Raspberry Pi does not technically have a power button straight up. Usually you have to unplug it, or with this kit, it has actually a switch on the power brick. I wanted one that looked good. It looked like you could put it under your TV and it would function and look correctly. And I found one. There are actually two different ones. And again, all of this stuff I'll link to you guys, specifically this case definitely, down in the description if you'll check it out. This is actually a really cool looking case, which we're going to unbox, and I'm actually going to install the Raspberry Pi in there. I'm also going to show you guys the starter kit. I also just happened to pick up a pretty run-of-the-mill Hyperkin USB controller. This one's actually a Genesis controller. I wanted to originally make a Genesis Classic since the AT Game ones was not very good looking. So I had this anyway, but really you can use any USB controller, an Xbox 360. I believe you can use Xbox One, PS3 controllers, or Super Nintendo, the 8-bit DOE. You can pretty much use anything that works with USB, and most Raspberry Pis now actually come with Bluetooth in there as well, so you can technically use Bluetooth controllers also. So let's get both of these unboxed, get this guy installed in here, and then go through the process, and I will actually show you, I got the monitor here set up, I'll show you guys some games and stuff playing on it, and you can check out its performance. All right, so we're gonna start by taking apart the starter kit. This is, as you can see, the ABUX Raspberry Pi Model 3 starter kit. And when I say starter kit, I really mean starter kit. Like, you basically, if you don't want the optional case that I have, if you already have a controller and you already have a USB stick, this is all you need to do this entire project. This will cover you. It has everything. Has a little, I guess, startup guide. I don't really know. I guess that's just to get everything set up. It shows you where all of the inputs and everything. You can do a lot of stuff with a Raspberry Pi 3 outside of what we're doing today. It's a pretty cool device. I have, I think, 4. This would be my 5th one. I'm a big fan of the Raspberry Pi, I'll just say that. Here is, this should be the power brick, and it does come with a memory stick. So it does come with a micro SD card. This is a 32 gigabyte one from SanDisk. It's one of the SanDisk Ultras. So yes, it is a real card. I know we've been over that before where places sell fake ones. This is an actual SanDisk Ultra 32 gigabyte card, and that is included in there, which is great. We have an HDMI cable, so it comes with a new HDMI cable, although HDMI cables are fairly cheap now anyway, so it's not like that's expensive like it used to be back in the day. The full power brick. This is an interesting power brick, and I'm going to show you why. Sorry for the crumbling. It does have an alternating switch on it, so you can kind of hear it. That is so you can turn it on and off without having to unplug it from the Raspberry Pi, because, like I said, if you don't have a case that has a power switch, you have to actually unplug it. This actually just turns it on and off easily. So I guess if rather than have to unplug it, you can kind of just reach around and hit the button. And this is a 2.5 amp brick, so more than enough juice for the Raspberry Pi. There are a lot of times where people would buy a much weaker one, you know, like a 1 amp, and it wasn't good. Get a stronger one. This one comes with a 2.5 amp. Great. That is perfect. That's what we need. So further down, actually, in this box still, I almost jumped over to the next one. We have a couple other things. They even include, this was interesting to me when I saw this, they even include this is a little USB, or I guess SD card to USB. So you can put your SD card in there and plug it into USB. It's also to USB-C, which is interesting. But that way you can pretty much plug your card in, because you do have to write an image to the card from your computer and then pop it in the Raspberry Pi to get it going. So they at least include this too if you have no other way. Although I think most people probably have some way nowadays to pop that in. Otherwise, though, they have that there. A couple heat sinks, and I think a Raspberry Pi badge as well. But the heat sinks the Raspberry Pi doesn't usually overheat horribly, but for what we'd be doing with games, it's a good idea probably to pop that on there. The case that I got, though, has a fan, which is pretty cool. But heat sinks are good nonetheless, easy to put on because the board is pretty bare, so no problems there. This is the case that they include for you. So they do give you a case. Like I said, I bought an optional one, but if you just want to buy this kit, it has a case here for you that you can use. You install, basically screw the board into this case. Everything should be inside of it. And you can kind of be off and running that way if you don't want to use the awesome looking case that I did get. So put that to the side, and then we get into the big thing here. Obviously, the Raspberry Pi model, or Pi 3 Model B from Element 14, and this is the big thing. It's very bare bones, doesn't come with a lot, which is why I tell people to get a starter kit so you don't have to guess or do anything crazy to make it work. I do like the packaging, by the way. It comes in like this nice little like manila envelope type packaging. Open that guy up, and this would be our circuit board, Raspberry Pi 3. When I say bare bones, guys, this is bare bones, seriously. I mean, look at it. It's just a circuit board, but it has everything we need. The Model 3 has a quad-core processor and everything, and it's more than strong enough to play Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis. I believe it can also do N64 and PS1 okay. We're going to check all of that out, and you can also get into overclocking and everything, but definitely will play all of our 16-bit games without any issues. And then really, I guess you could even get into things like Neo Geo and stuff like that as well, because the program we're going to use supports a wide range of stuff. So we got this part here. Now let's install it into our case. So this is our case right here. I got this on Amazon as well. Again, the link is down in the description if anyone wants to see it or check it out. It was prime shipped. It got to me in like 2 days, which was nice. But you can see kind of why I was a little interested in this casing. Now they do come with a bunch of instructions as well for installing it, which we'll probably need. Comes with its own screwdriver also, which was, I guess, good, and I think there's some screws in there too, which we'll need. So I was excited for this because it looks exactly, or at least close enough, I should say, to a Nintendo or Super Nintendo Classic. And check it out, it has USB ports on the front even. And these actually wire to the board inside through some headers and everything, and you can actually plug your controller in right through here, so you don't have to go around the side or the back or anything. And the power and reset are tactile, and they plug in and they work. Around the back you can see there are spots here for the HDMI, the power, and you got the headphone jack there. And then on the side here, got a spot for the LAN adapter, and then the other USB ports. So we got a bunch there. We're going to open this guy up. There's a couple screws around the outside, pretty straightforward. Inside you can see the fan here that's already plugged in on this guy, so it'll already go ahead and just get power from the headers we're going to plug in. And then we have our USB extenders here. This will take up, it looks like, the USB ports. We're just going to plug in and extend them out, but those are USB ports you would probably be using for your controllers anyway, so it's really not a big deal. Technically you could plug anything you want into the front and it'll act just like the side ones. So let's install now our Raspberry Pi. Now, as you're screwing them in, you want to make sure you at least get the USB ports in to the back beforehand. Just make sure they're lined up, and you kind of wriggle it around and it will pop in after a bit of a fight. I will say that these do fight you a bit. So that's in, and then we're going to want to also, of course, plug in. Yep. We also want to plug in our headers here. We're going to screw this guy in, finish screwing it in while we're holding that up. This is the main chip you want to have a heatsink on. Now, this is the big one right here, obviously. So let me drop that on there, and then I'll put one also on the back chip. So we're going to put the bigger one on this guy, then the smaller one they give you there. They're going to give you, remember the starter kit came with a blue one and like a kind of one that's like a copper color. And they have self-adhesive stickers on the bottom. And that's basically all you need for now. We have that fan to help out as well, but for the most part, this is a very large one for the back, by the way. It's a big heatsink, cool. So this should help at least keep it mostly cool. We're not going crazy. People water cool these things. We're just looking to keep it within relative terms for its heat. Not going crazy with it. So we have a spot here. It does tell us where to plug in our headers with the red cord in the front. Going back, we plug it into the front 3. So we're going to do that now as well, right in here. And with that, we are pretty much good to close this guy up, and we should have our Raspberry Pi all set up. Clips in very nicely, actually. You can kind of hear it clipping. And I still have to screw it in completely, right? We still have to do that. So let's get that done, and then we'll be good. All right, so now it's all together. The Raspberry Pi is inside. Buttons all pressed. We have this little door here that opens up because there's 2 more USB ports, the LAN NIC adapter, and then we do have HDMI, the 3.5mm out, and then the power. And then on the side we have our SD card. It's very clean looking at this point, right? It looks really good. It's something you put under it. And people like to say that the Super Nintendo Classic is very small along with the Nintendo Classic. Check this out. This is our Raspberry Pi, right? The one we just put together. This is the Super Nintendo Classic. Looks a lot larger now, doesn't it, next to this guy? Yeah, so this is a very, very small, very discrete system, but it technically has a lot more potential than something like the Super Nintendo Classic does, or even the Nintendo Classic. Here is, if you want to take a look at what the Nintendo Classic looks like compared to it, here is obviously our Raspberry Pi, and then here is the Nintendo Classic. So it's a little closer, I would say. I mean, the Nintendo Classic is even a little bigger than or a little smaller than the Super Nintendo Classic, but there you go. It's much smaller than all 3 of them, as you can see. It's much smaller, which is great. It's just another benefit of the Raspberry Pi. It's just a much smaller system for that. So for the next part, you need to go and you need to get an image called RetroPie for the Raspberry Pi 3. I left a link in the description below. It walks you through how to flash that image depending on your operating system, because you could be on, obviously, the OS X for Mac, you could be on Linux, most people probably on Windows, and you'd use Win32 Flasher. Basically, you remember that SD card I showed you and then that USB stick? You actually plug it into your computer, and then you just point the image after unzipping to that SD card. It'll flash it, then you come back, you pop it into the Raspberry Pi 3, turn it on, it'll go through a bunch of stuff, and then you will land here, the Raspberry Pi screen, and we will want to obviously do configuration and a bunch of other things. So what we want to do is we want to add ROMs to that USB stick. So that's what we're going to do first. So now that you're done configuring your controller and everything, you're going to land on a screen like this. It's going to say RetroPie. It won't have any systems or anything. It'll just be that RetroPie logo there. And this is where that USB stick comes into play. You want to take that over to your computer, plug in that 4 gig, 8 gig, 32 gig, whatever you have, format to FAT32, and then make a folder on the root that's just called RetroPie. That's where all of your ROM files are going to go into, but we need the Raspberry Pi, the RetroPie, to actually create those folders. So once you have all of that done with the folder on the root, do nothing else, unplug it, bring it over to your Raspberry Pi with this on at the menu, plug it in. If it has an activity light, it's going to flash for, I would say, 10 to 15 seconds, and then it'll stop. Then you're good to unplug it, take it back to your computer, and you're going to find that it just populated the RetroPie folder inside with a ton of system folders for systems you probably recognize. The Game Boy, the N64, the Super Nintendo, all of those will be in there, and that's where you put your unzipped ROM files. You just drop them in, you then bring the USB stick back over, refresh it by restarting it, and you're good. All of your ROM files will show up as systems. So now with all of that done, you'll have all of your systems populating and everything, and you're ready to play. So let's check out a couple of games here. I loaded up a Super Nintendo game, a Game Boy Advance game, even a Nintendo 64 game, just see how it all plays. So I guess we'll start with none other than the Super Nintendo because, you know, I'm using a Genesis controller, so why not, I guess. Mega Man X, one of the classics, right? So here we go, it's gonna launch, we can configure and everything, and it'll tell us right there that, yeah, all the errors and stuff are logged for us. So here we go, we're gonna play some Mega Man X on the Super Nintendo with the RetroPie. Emulation's good. The RetroPie 3 is, well, the Raspberry Pi 3 is overly powerful for Super Nintendo, Nintendo Genesis. It'll do all that, no sweat. That's not even an issue, really, for it, to be honest. it plays right through it. So we're going to actually go in here. Let me start through that, start, and then we'll game start, and I'll play some of the opening for you, and you can see all of that. It looks good on the screen. There's a lot of filter settings you can play around with. Response time is pretty good. Let's see. Okay, so I'm using the Genesis controller, so you can imagine how it feels playing Mega Man X with a Genesis controller. It's not the best, but it is a 6-button controller at least. So you can see it does play well, and this will work pretty well for pretty much any Super Nintendo game that has pretty good emulation, which is almost, I think, all of them. Even Star Fox, I think, has been pretty much conquered at this point. So you can pretty much play everything. I know a lot of people will use this for RPGs that didn't come over. It'll support all of that too. Basically anything you can play on your computer, you can play right here through HDMI with sound and everything, and it's pretty good for emulation. We're now jumping out of there, and we're going to jump into a Mega Drive game as they showed, or a Sega Genesis game. Of course, Sonic. Can't go wrong with Sonic, right? So we're going to jump in with Sonic now. That'll give us an idea of how it looks when it's obviously going pretty quick and everything. I'm going to roll through a level, Green Hill Zone, why not? And again, just take an eye and see how everything looks for you, because this is pretty much what you'll see mostly on your LCD and everything, and it's a good looking. The emulation on the Raspberry Pi 3 is good for these games. The 64 one's a little iffier, which we will check out as well. It's not perfect, but it's good enough, I think, for a lot of people, especially if you're comparing it to something like the Super Nintendo Classic or Nintendo Classic or the AT Games Genesis. This is it. There's so much flexibility with it, and we're just going to keep going through here. And there's the first one. The back out's pretty simple. I have it set to 2 different button keys, so I press them. It just kicks me right back out like that. So let's go back again, and we will now check out a Game Boy Advance game. I did load Pokemon on here because obviously a lot of people enjoy Pokemon. Fire Red, actually, we'll load that right up. Again, I guess I should be saying that you shouldn't be playing the games that you don't own. All the ones I put on here I specifically do own, just so there wouldn't be an issue. So here we are now with a Game Boy Advanced game in Pokemon Fire Red. I'm going to jump through here. And the amount of games that this supports, if you've done this, maybe you've seen it on, like when you open the folder and you take a look down, tons of systems. Probably the Vectrix is enabled here. And what's cool is it can connect to the internet, and I believe it can pull all sorts of stuff, whether it's, I think it can pull like cover art and everything. It's pretty cool. So this is something that's kind of tough. I should have at least done a save file or something beforehand. But we're just going to check this out on here. It looks good on my monitor. It looks fair. Of course, if you start really blowing these up, you can obviously stretch the image pretty big, and it starts to look pretty pixelated. But what can you do? This was designed for a like a 3.5-inch screen or something. So yeah, that's fine. We're just going to get through that. It does support save state and everything, from what I remember. Let me get through here, and then we'll kind of walk around so you can see how the frame rate looks there. It looks good, as you can imagine. This is probably the worst part of Pokemon, is getting through the beginning. You just end up pressing A over and over and over again. I don't think I'd use a Genesis controller for these kind of things. The 360 controller is awesome for this, or a Super Nintendo SNES Do or 8-bit Do. So this is a good version of Pokemon, obviously, on here. You could save. Or you can just use save state, obviously. It'll work fine. All of the ROM hacks, because there's a million Pokemon ROM hacks you can play on here as well. It's just overall a good thing. Now let's jump into that N64 game, because that's where things could fall apart for me. One, I'm using a Genesis controller, which is probably not the best for that, but we'll take a shot. You can also get, of course, USB N64 controllers that would probably work better. So here we go, Banjo-Kazooie. Here's hoping this works all right. N64 games work okay sometimes on here. All right, here we go. So this is Banjo-Kazooie, the first one. I don't remember playing a lot of N64 games on my Raspberry Pi at all. I have 2 of them set up, and I don't really play a lot of N64 games. I usually save them for this, Super Nintendo games, Nintendo games. They work really well. I think I played all the way through, I think it was Star Ocean. I think I played all the way through Star Ocean on it, and it was fine. So, right off the bat, I'm going to be honest, it's the frame rate, it's struggling a little bit. But, I mean, the frame rate was pretty bad in the original one anyway, so I guess I shouldn't say too much. I don't think I have the stick set up well. Oh, okay, I guess it'll work at least. It'll work a bit, you know. Let me see, can I, oh yeah, there we go, okay, cool, I'm in. Of course, it has like the cutscene and everything in the beginning, so it's gonna be a little bit for me to get the gameplay, but it does have a frame counter there, 19 frames, 21 frames, around 20 frames per second. I don't know how playable it is. You can overclock the Raspberry Pi 3. That might help the situation. And it has a fan in there, so if you want to do that, you should be able to. And there are a lot of speed hacks and stuff people use to try to fix some of these ROMs. So that's kind of a thing you can kind of delve into if you want. But I do know it plays PS1 games actually fairly well, which is good. It's just the N64 was a weird system to emulate. So check out PS1 games on here. It works generally okay. So hey, it's at least playing. But yeah, guys, that's gonna do it for me here today. I hope you enjoyed this look at building a Retro Pi 3 or Retro Pi, rather than Raspberry Pi 3. It's a really cool thing to do. It's a fun project. You can use Raspberry Pi for a lot of things. Media Center, it works great for Media Center. So if you want to load up Kodi so you can watch all of your stuff easily at different places. It's silent if you don't put a fan in it, which is great for people who are watching movies and don't want to be bothered by like a fan that you can hear in the background. And it's overall, it's just a cool device. This is just one of the many things you can do with it. And honestly, it makes an awesome way to play some of these retro games through HDMI, and it generally plays pretty well. Again, the N64 is kind of iffy, but a lot of the other stuff runs great. I think it has even Scum VM, I think, is on there. And seriously, some crazy systems are on there. The Amiga, I think, supported. But for Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Game Boy, Game Gear, all that stuff, pick one up. I think the starter kit is like $74, $75, and you don't technically have to get crazy with it like the Super Nintendo case and everything. You can get a pretty good experience overall for that. And it's a good system, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped you out. Hope this helped you get to the finish line with one of these projects with Retro Pi. Make sure you guys like the video if you enjoyed it. Dislike it if not. Leave comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.